Following North Korea's latest failed missile test, Pyongyang remains defiant amid stepped-up U.S. warnings. Gambia's vice president credits women for playing a critical role in the nation's peaceful transition of power. And The Fate of the Furious races to the biggest global box office opening ever. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. Now, famine has been proclaimed in 3 sub-Saharan African states, Nigeria, South Sudan and Somalia, with food insecurity growing in other parts of the continent. While the most immediate reasons for hunger are drought, crop failures and conflict, VOA senior analyst Jeffrey Young reports that there are governmental, political and even ethnic factors that amplify the problem. In this first of a 3-part series, the underlying story of Nigeria's hunger is examined.
Nigeria's capital, Abuja, is filled with plenty of food. So is Nigeria's seaport city, Lagos. But in Nigeria's northeastern Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states, there is famine, and it's spreading. In February, the United Nations said that more than 7 million people in that part of Nigeria could risk starvation. While conflict with the insurgent group Boko Haram has been a factor in food insecurity there, years of government inattention to the region helped to set the stage for hunger. That's detailed by Center for Strategic and International Studies Africa Director Jennifer Cook.
Infrastructure and investment in Nigeria has been almost exclusively directed into the oil sector and the energy sector, leaving what sustained the northern economies, agriculture and manufacturing, to wither. And so this is part of the reason that there is so little infrastructure up in the north and particularly the northeast.
Also contributing to northeast Nigeria's hunger and hunger in some other nations is an inability to focus the government's attention and response to that region. A point made clear via Skype by NGO Oxfam senior advisor Scott Paul.
The people with the least political power, be it for regional reasons or be it for tribal or ethnic reasons, consistently have the least development resources and the least political accountability at their disposal. And so when humanitarian emergencies strike, they're the ones who are most vulnerable and they're the last ones to get help. And that's exactly what's happening in the Northeast.
Abuja says it is working to address hunger, not only concerning food, but also building up the infrastructure to provide water that grows crops. But the internal dynamics of Nigeria's government can work against fulfillment of those critical goals, according via Skype to research organization Chatham House Deputy Africa Director Elizabeth Donnelly.
But it's incredibly complex because of the governance environment in Nigeria, the different layers of actors and the different messaging you hear. So you might hear different messaging on the humanitarian crisis from the federal government in Abuja and from the state government in Borno State. This can make it very difficult for international humanitarian organizations to engage.
Compounding effective response to northeastern Nigeria's hunger is the insurgency of the radical Islamist group Boko Haram. In 2013, then-President Goodluck Jonathan launched a major offensive, which current President Muhammadu Buhari has escalated, determined to crush Boko Haram once and for all. CSIS Africa Director Jennifer Cook discusses the effects caused by that strong focus on victory.
I think the federal government still is very much focused on a military strategy that just kills every last Boko Haram member. And they've not yet put the kind of thinking and strategy and building blocks in for what comes then. How do you address the humanitarian problem? How do you allow the many millions who have been displaced by this to go back and resume their livelihoods in agriculture or what have you?
Oxfam's Scott Paul says that along with rebuilding the Northeast's infrastructure, there also has to be a political reconciliation that gives people in that region the sense that they are being heard and their needs addressed by Abuja. Not doing so, he says, leaves wounds that could fester and trigger the return of Boko Haram or yet another insurgency. And if that happens, he says, hunger will undoubtedly return. Jeffrey Young, VOA News.
Well, the massive flow of migrants trying to reach Europe continued over the Easter weekend. More than 2,000 migrants were plucked from the Mediterranean Sea in a series of dramatic rescues. However, 7 migrants drowned, according to a rescue ship official. Rescue ships took on thousands of survivors from 16 rubber dinghies and 3 small wooden boats in deteriorating weather between Friday and Sunday. An Italian Coast Guard spokesman says there were at least 19 rescue operations by the Coast Guard or ships operated by non-government organizations. The International Organization for Migration says nearly 32,000 migrants have arrived in Europe by sea so far this year. More than 650 have died or are missing. An Egyptian court has acquitted an Egyptian-American woman and 7 others after nearly 3 years of detention on human trafficking charges related to her foundation that helped Cairo's street children. Chief defendant Aya Hijazi, her husband, and 6 others had been in custody since May 2014 when Cairo police raided her foundation without a judicial warrant, confiscating laptop computers and other equipment. The 7 were charged with human trafficking, sexual exploitation of children, and using children in anti-government protests. The arrests sparked an outcry from activist groups that said the charges were fabricated and part of a government crackdown on civil society. A North Korean missile launch on Sunday turned out to be a high-profile failure. U.S. and South Korean officials say the missile exploded during launch. According to the U.S. Pacific Command, the missile blew up almost immediately as it was launched near the country's submarine base in Sinpo on the east coast of the country. White House aides say U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, who arrived in South Korea Sunday to talk about rising tensions of the North's nuclear and missile programs, was briefed on the failed launch. U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis released a statement saying the president and his military team are aware of North Korea's most recent and successful missile launch, and the president has no further comment. The attempted missile launch was reportedly not an intercontinental ballistic missile. Now, U.S. Vice President Pence has made it clear that America stands with South Korea against North Korea as the reclusive state continues to conduct missile and nuclear tests.
Nowhere is that more evident than with our commitment to confront the region's most dangerous and urgent threat to peace and security, the regime in North Korea. Since 1992, the United States and our allies have stood together for a denuclearized Korean peninsula. We hope to achieve this objective through peaceable means, but all options are on the table.
Was speaking at a joint news conference with South Korea's acting president, Prime Minister Hwang Cho-in. Pence warned Pyongyang not to test President Donald Trump's resolve to address the threat posed by the isolated regime. Pence earlier visited the heavily militarized border between the two Koreas, meeting with military leaders and U.S. troops. The vice president is visiting South Korea at the start of a 4-nation Asia tour to reinforce the U.S. strong commitment to allies in this increasingly volatile region. Now, although North Korea's medium-range missile failed, its launch demonstrated North Korea's continued defiance of outside pressure to halt its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. VOA's Michael Bowman has more.
Vice President Mike Pence arrived in South Korea hours after the missile test, an event he could not ignore in remarks to U.S. troops.
This morning's provocation from the North is just the latest reminder of the risks each one of you face every day in the defense of the freedom of the people of South Korea and the defense of America in this part of the world.
The United States and its allies have something new to ponder: what could be North Korea's longest-range missiles to date.
The purpose of that parade is to sort of demonstrate military prowess in a threatening way. And so whether those weapons are real or fake is unclear.
Real or fake, the Trump administration is signaling ever stronger resolve to eliminate the North Korean threat.
All options are on the table. It's clear that the president is determined not to allow this kind of capability to threaten the United States. And our president will take action.
For decades, U.S. administrations have urged China to step up pressure on North Korea. President Trump is doing the same and appears to be willing to set aside a key campaign promise in order to secure Beijing's cooperation.
I'm going to instruct my Treasury Secretary to label China a currency manipulator, which should have been done years ago.
The stakes are high, according to those with first-hand experience on the Korean Peninsula.
They've had over 25 missile tests. They're working on a whole new generation of missiles. And people often take the view, well, somehow this is all about their regime survival. This is how they'll survive being a nuclear weapons country. Actually, I think they're more ambitious about it. They see this as a means to somehow decouple the U.S. from its ally in South Korea.
And I think there's an international consensus now, including the Chinese and the Chinese leadership, that this is a situation that just can't continue.
That consensus is sure to be put to the test in the months ahead. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
U.S. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster is in Pakistan, where he is meeting with both civilian and military officials on bilateral security matters and efforts to stabilize neighboring Afghanistan. McMaster arrived in Islamabad on Monday, a day after holding talks with Afghan leaders in Kabul to review and assess the situation with regard to the U.S. military's counterinsurgency and counterterrorism missions in the country. Speaking to a local Afghan television station after concluding his meeting in Kabul, McMaster withheld comments on whether a new strategy the Trump administration is assembling will include a boost to American troops' strength in Afghanistan. Well, Christians around the world on Sunday celebrated Easter, the day they believe Jesus arose from the dead. It is the holiest day of the Christian calendar. Throngs of the faithful endured heavy security checks to secure a place in the Vatican's flower-filled St. Peter's Square for Pope Francis' celebration of Easter Mass and his delivery of his annual Urbi et Orbi to the city and to the world Easter address. The pontiff prayed that Jesus' sacrifice will inspire world leaders to bring an end to the brutal 6-year civil war in Syria.
In questi tempi, in modo particolare,
may God in particular way sustain the efforts of those who are effectively working to healing and comfort the civilian population of Syria, the beloved and the martyred Syria, who are victims of war that does not cease to sow horror and death.
Well, Easter marks the end of Holy Week, which includes Monday, Thursday, the day of Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples. Holy Week also includes Good Friday, the day Jesus was impaled. Easter is Christianity's movable feast, falling on a different date each year. Now, Western Christian churches celebrate Easter on the first Sunday following the full moon after the vernal equinox. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com and find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Now, coming up, part 2 of VOA's exclusive interview with the Gambian Vice President. So stay with us.
This is BizBeat.
You can live or die by the sword or make money by the sword. That is if you're John Lundemo, who's been crafting Odin-blade swords for 30 years.
I was always breaking the steel swords. I was breaking them all the time. You know, halfway through a sword fight and your sword breaks, it's annoying. So I started making them.
Inspired by history, Lundemo's sword designs combine ancient Eastern and Western cultures with a mix of Hollywood and his own ideas, of course. And yes, there's a market for them. Ryan Whitlinger is the owner of Cult of Athena.
People with a general historical interest, martial arts practitioners, people who practice both Asian martial arts and European Western martial arts.
It's hard work hammering at the anvil, dipping the blade into the forge, and then grinding and sanding into a shiny, slicing weapon.
The cool factor is way up there.
That cool comes at a price. A handcrafted Odin blade sword will cost you $1,500 or more. For VOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
Welcome Welcome back. The Gambian Vice President credits women for playing a critical role in the peaceful transition of power after December's elections. Despite some successes, Fatoumata Jallow Tambajang, who is also the country's Minister of Women's Affairs, says countless challenges remain in the quest for gender equality. Here's viewers Mariama Diallo with part 2 of our exclusive interview with the Gambian Vice President.
I wouldn't want to have you here and have a woman of your stature in Africa and around the world without asking this question. In countries like Rwanda, the number of parliamentarian women are very, very high. We've had women presidents like Joyce Banda, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. We've had vice presidents or prime ministers in neighboring countries, Senegal, and now the VP in Gambia. So there's a lot of progress that women are making in Africa. At the same time, President Buhari, who talked about one woman in particular, his wife, that belonging to the kitchen or to the bedroom. So I want to just get your sense of what is our status these days in Africa, and what kind of assessment do you have on that?
My personal assessment, had been involved in the women's movement over 20 years, is the fact that women are progressing. The status of women is improving. Women have predominantly occupied the informal sector. They have been in the agricultural sector, in the social sector, environment, water and sanitation, and everywhere. And they had taken, for many years, they were taking a back seat. But if you measure now, from the developmental perspective and economy, you find that women are increasingly creating their own space, and that is what is important. Women are no longer accepting to be silent. What we need to do now is to really have strategies for women which will be articulated by women based on their priorities, their aspirations, and ensure that government is held accountable.
And I want to actually ask real quick while you're there, one of my last questions about the role of women in the transition, in this peaceful transition in the Gambia.
Yes, women played a critical role in the transition. We knew that women and children will bear the brunt of any conflict, and the situation of Gambia was going towards conflict. So rather than sitting being complacent, we took leadership into the process and helped to bring about the change you're talking about in the Gambia. It is peaceful because women were on the ground just to advise and to counsel the youths not to go into the streets, because that could have been chaotic, it could have been loss of lives. Women are playing a pivotal role in politics. We need to encourage them more. We need to provide, ensure that all the educational facilities that we have, or opportunities that we have, and other development activities encourage women to come in the forefront by providing them the productive resources, the advocacy they need, productive in terms of land tenure system, microfinancing, microcredit, and also mentoring. Mentoring is very important. My passion and commitment is to have more women in the political process, in the economic process. Right now, in the Gambia, we have 4 women in cabinet, but looking at the type of government, supportive government that we have back home under the leadership of His Presidency, Adama Barrow, we will have more women in decision making by the time we complete our tenure of office.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, a fast and furious weekend at the box office. We'll be right back.
Just who will stay here. What are the visitors?
Every song has a different meaning to each person that hears it and interprets it differently. Border Crossings is unique in that it lets the listeners decide what we're playing. But we bring in guests so that our audience has access to some of the biggest names in pop music today, and we reach out to the audience each and every day in different ways.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. It was a fast and furious weekend at the box office. The Fate of the Furious has raced to the top of the box office chart, breaking an international record in the process. The eighth film in the action thriller franchise took an estimated $532.5 million worldwide over Easter weekend. The figure makes it the strongest global debut ever, marginally overtaking the $529 million taken in by Star Wars: The Force Awakens. The Fate of the Furious accounted for nearly two-thirds of all U.S. box office receipts over the weekend. Well, next up, a walk up Katampe Hill in Nigeria's capital is more than an urban excursion. For these young people, it is a chance to explore Abuja, a city carved into the country's administrative hub in the 1980s. Outings like these are organized by the Strides Adventure Club, which is trying to turn hiking into a regular activity by bringing groups of people together on 2 Saturdays every month along trails around the city. Now, the club was started last June by 2 friends while they were on a similar expedition. Then they decided to sell the idea to other Nigerians. Today, the club has over 70 members who pay a one-time registration fee of $3. Well, and finally, meet Miro, a robot that's on a mission to make friends. Developed by experts at Britain's University of Sheffield, it is intended to be used in various environments, but particularly as a companion, perhaps for the elderly or maybe for people with disabilities. Miro is fitted with various sensors, meaning it can feel a stroke on its head or back. Its tactile perception and mood regulation systems then allow it to respond accordingly with expressive behavior such as tail wagging. It also has smart stereo cameras built into its eyes, which allow it to recognize people and follow their movements. And that is what is trending today. Now, a Nigerian-born, California-based electrical engineer has developed a mobile application called Movin that is designed to implement virtual cardiac rehab programs for patients with heart disease. VOA's Paul Dio has more.
The World Health Organization says that cardiovascular disease, which includes heart disease and stroke, is the world's #1 cause of death. 17.5 million people die each year from heart-related disease. But could a mobile cardiac rehab program application be the answer? Ade Adesanya, co-founder of the Los Angeles-based Moving Analytics, has built a cutting-edge application called Movin that could be the future for hospitals to implement virtual cardiac rehab programs for patients with heart disease.
What we do at Moving Analytics is we work with hospitals to design and implement virtual cardiac rehab programs for patients with heart disease. The goal is to help a patient after a heart attack or heart surgery to do their cardiac rehab at home through a tablet or a smartphone application.
This mobile technology has the potential to overcome barriers to access cardiac rehabilitation and may be a useful tool for increasing participation.
The problem we're really solving is that less than 20% of patients in the US after heart surgery or heart attack do cardiac rehab, even though all the research shows that if they do it, they can live 5 years longer, they have half the risk of getting a second heart attack, it improves their quality of life. But for patients, the challenge is that they have to go to clinic through 36 times. And the program is very expensive. What we're doing is just helping patients be able to get access to healthcare, from the comfort of their homes.
The company's biggest breakthrough came when they first met executives from the American Heart Association. What started as a pitch to build a fitness tracker resulted in an opportunity for Moving Analytics to venture into cardiac rehab.
I remember picking up the phone and I called close to 100 cardiac rehab programs across the country. And I was like, hey, I'm a grad student. I'm working with the American Heart Association. We're trying to build an app for cardiac rehab, but I don't even know what it is. So can you tell me what you do in a cardiac rehab program, what the challenges are, and what you see as the source of innovation?
Moving is an evidence-based rehab program developed at Stanford University.
They had a cardiac rehab program, but that rehab program was more of a research division at Stanford University. And what they've been doing for the last 20 years was they've been building this home-based program because they knew that the current model of cardiac rehab doesn't scale. So they had built a program and they did numerous clinical trials around that program. That program is called MultiFit. And they were able to show that patients who did that program had the same clinical outcomes as the center-based program.
Shou Chow is the Chief Technology Officer, Moving Analytics. Says that technology is lowering the barrier of people making products, but security to protect our patients' information has to be a priority.
Take security into our account, seriously, because as we are healthcare company, security is the #1 thing, when you build a product. So we take all the possible security measure we can take into make sure our product is secure to serve patients in the hospitals.
Since its inception, the company has signed up to 13 hospitals as paying customers. As the firm grows and expands into more hospitals, its leaders have their sights set on other rehab applications and a remote disease management platform to include other diseases, such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, hypertension, and stroke. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Well, on this just into Africa 54, Kenyans have swept the 121st running of the Boston Marathon. Kenyan Geoffrey Kirui was the men's winner. It was his first marathon victory ever. Kirui outtrained Galen Rupp of the United States to win the race in 2 hours, 9 minutes and 36 seconds. On the women's side, Edna Kiplagat won with a time of 2 hours, 21 minutes and 53 seconds. It's the first time Kiplagat has raced in the Boston Marathon. Now, that's our show for today. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Most people enjoy listening to music. But is this expression actually about songs and tunes?
Music to my ears.
Jonathan, I cannot believe we have to work over the weekend.
Did you not hear the news? The meeting for the project got canceled. No work this weekend after all.
Awesome! That is music to